Frederick Barr is the most hated man on death row. What's up, you guys? Welcome to today's video. We are going to be talking about the most hated man on death row. Now, this inmate is in Indiana State Prison, which, as you guys know, I'm pretty fascinated with. I bring it up fairly often. I interviewed a former corrections officer from Indiana State Prison. Her name is Officer Kim. I will link that video down below, as well as her channel. She gave us such incredible insight on how that prison operates. So definitely go check out that video. All right, without further ado, let's kick this thing off. Indiana State Prison is a maximum security prison for men that houses 2,434 inmates. Interestingly enough, this facility also houses minimum security inmates on the same compound. It is a very old prison. It was built in 1860, which was 161 years ago. That's a very old building. And what I found so interesting when I went to this prison is that it's in the middle of town. It is smack dab in the middle of this town, and when I was driving around the perimeter, which is completely fine to do because it's in town, there's houses right on this prison. There are people that obviously have children that live within throwing distance of this prison. That was something that I found pretty uncommon in my personal experience, because in a lot of situations, prisons are way out in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing but corn and like two houses maybe, and they're not throwing distance to the prison. So when I tell you, when I drove around, I stopped by this person's driveway, I could have literally thrown a football over the fence and an inmate could have caught it. And I could hear the inmates chanting from the street. And when the minimum security inmates were on the yard, I pulled over on the side of the road and I talked to them. I just kind of yelled a couple of things, you know, just stay strong. I'm not exactly sure what I yelled, but I wanted to just say hi to them, and I saw an opportunity and I took it. So it's a very interesting prison. It's a very dated prison, and it's a privately run prison. One of the most famous inmates that have served time here was John Dillinger, who was a bank robber in like the 20s, and he was released on parole in the 30s. So that just kind of shows you just how old this prison is. It housed and released John Dillinger. So that's not who we're talking about today. I just kind of wanted to give you guys some background of this prison because I really am so fascinated with Indiana State Prison. I think one of the things that captivated my attention when discussing what goes on behind those walls is that this prison has bars. Now that creates a danger to the staff. So they have a walkway or a tier where, you know, I forget what Kim called it, but there's several tiers up and they're bars. So when an officer is walking by on the tier, catwalk on the range, I think she called it range, I would have just called it a tier, same thing. But when officers are walking by on that range, an inmate can grab you, an inmate can throw something at you. It creates a danger to staff, and I don't like that prisons still operate that way. So that was like one of my first red flags. The other one was that she was not trained properly. She was taught how to defend herself against a punch, and that's about all. That's not good. Now, Frederick Barr, let's talk about him. The most hated man on death row. Frederick Barr was sentenced to death for the murders of a mother and her young daughter in Indiana. Frederick Barr was working as a construction worker in Indiana in 2004 when he forced his way into a home and attempted to rape the homeowner. Frederick Barr would stab to death the woman and her 4-year-old daughter. Barr was initially sentenced to death for the murders on June 9th, 2005, but the sentence was overturned by the U.S. 7th Circuit Court of Appeals. The U.S. Court of Appeals cited insufficient legal counsel for failing to object to jury instructions that kept the jury from considering mitigating circumstances. This resulted in the decision to overturn Barr's death penalty sentence. During the selection of jury brought in by Huntington County, the Court of Appeals said Cummings incorrectly suggested that the standard for guilty by mentally ill and legal insanity were the same. Morgan Clark was 7 years old when her mother and little sister were killed by Barr in 2004 at their home near Naples. She was at school when the murders happened, but she said she is still haunted by their deaths and suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder because of it. Barr admitted to the crimes at the time of his 2005 trial and agreed to a plea agreement of life imprisonment without parole for both murders. A quote from Frederick Barr in court was this: "I live with the regret of having stolen 2 innocent lives every day. I can only give you my sincere apology. I know you are free to reject my apology. I will be punished for the rest of my life for what I have done, but I will, with the sorrow and regret of my actions, forever in my heart and my soul." The judge said that he only accepted the plea agreement because it's what the family wanted, because he was originally sentenced to death. The following resentencing, Fleming said she wanted to remember what Barr did to her family. I think we need to know and remember what he did to a 4-year-old child, and that's damage we have to live with, and we want to remember the true victims. Many articles go on to say that he intended to rape her and that he slashed their throats. Let's just pause here. Could you imagine someone breaking into your home and killing you and your daughter, knowing my other daughter is in school, my 7-year-old is in school, I am dying right now, she's not gonna have her mom, she's not gonna have her sister. Oh my God. I mean, that is just such a nightmare. So Indiana State Prison houses 12 men on death row, and they're kept 23-1, which means they're in their cells for 23 hours a day, and they come out for 1 hour of rec a day. What I find really interesting about his case specifically is that the family wanted him to live. I feel like when I'm reading these articles, I don't see that very often. The family usually wants that person to be put to death, and this is a state that offers that. So I was surprised that the family said they wanted him to live. Now that could be because maybe they wanted him to suffer, you know, and a lot of people think that if you were put to death for a horrendous crime that you're getting off easy and that you should have to spend the rest of your life in prison. So I just find that interesting, but I am in no way trying to tell anyone how to mourn. That's what they decided. And it's impossible to know what you would want if that happened to you or your family. It's impossible to know how you would handle that trauma. Frederick has a cat on death row. Now this is an interesting policy that Indiana State Prison allows. They have a cat program. So what the inmates do is they fill out an order and they ask for a cat. They can ask for a male cat, a female cat, and if you have, you know, you've been a good inmate, a model inmate, and the prison feels that you have earned the privilege to have a cat, because it is a privilege, then you will be given a cat. So I think that that helps inmates so much. This helps with morale. It gives you something to care for. It gives you that responsibility. And if we give inmates just a little bit more privilege, they're gonna have something to look forward to. A lot of inmates feel as though they have nothing to lose. If you have multiple life sentences, you know you're gonna die in prison, and the prison treats you badly, what's the incentive to be good? What's the incentive to not abuse or try to harm yourself or staff or other inmates? So I feel as though giving inmates little privileges here and there, like having a cat, can improve morale by tenfold. I also believe they should allow conjugal visits, and I know that's a very controversial thing, but think about it. We rip families apart when someone makes a mistake and they go to prison, and if you allowed inmates to have conjugal visits, do you think that they're going to try to kill each other every day? No, because they have that to look forward to. They have that intimate time with their wife or their husband to look forward to. And I know that that will help reduce violence in prison more than I could even say. But this country doesn't want to do that. So moving on. Now, the most hated man on death row, you would think that this person wouldn't have, you know, a girlfriend, but you would be wrong. Frederick does have a girlfriend. Her name is Susan, and she lives in Germany. And in this documentary that I watched on him, he writes letters to her, and they have an intimate relationship per the mail, which is a very common thing that inmates have. So inmates having pen pals, super common. Falling in love with people by writing letters and talking on the phone is a real thing. It happens all the time. Super common. A lot of high-profile inmates get fan mail too. Like Chris Watts has a shit ton of fan mail. Can you believe that? Yeah, neither can I, but it happens. So now appeals are very difficult in prison, especially when we're talking about death row. There are 16 levels to appeals, and that is not including clemency. And Frederick Barr, from what I saw in this documentary that was filmed 4 weeks ago, was on his 13th level of this appeal, but other articles are saying that it was overturned and he was given life. So I'm a little unclear on if he is still on death row waiting execution or if his sentence was really overturned, because I saw a documentary posted 4 weeks ago and he was still, in fact, on death row in Indiana State Prison, which houses 12 men. And the last person that was put to death was in 2009. Now, the process of lethal injection is actually really morbid, but it's something that I find interesting. As somebody that has studied abnormal psychology, these are the kinds of cases that I'm really interested in. And the whole process of lethal injection is interesting. So it is the officer's duty, it's their job to put inmates to death when it is their time. So that person's going to get a last meal, they're going to be allowed to say their last words, and so forth. But they escort the inmate to this room where there's this gurney and you're tied down, you're handcuffed up, you can't go anywhere. And it is in that moment that the officers will ask, do you have any last words? The officers then read a death warrant to the inmates. They are aware of what is going on and that you have been sentenced to die per Indiana state or whatever the script is for that. But when inmates go on death row and it's finally their time for lethal injection, most of them have accepted their fate long before they got to that room, long before they're strapped down to that gurney. They've accepted, this is where I'm gonna die. I couldn't imagine having to accept my death. I've been to prison, but to have to accept your death, yeah, I will die here. That's something that is very heavy. You know, I've met a lot of lifers. I've never met anyone personally on death row. I do know somebody that has worked on death row and I hope to interview him very soon. He actually called it X row. The inmates would call it X row because they didn't want to call it death row every day. They wanted to keep that positivity, but I couldn't imagine having to accept that fate. And like I said, I've met a lot of lifers that have had to accept, I'm gonna die here. I don't have a parole sentence. This is my life now. And I can't imagine what they have had to go through psychologically to accept the fact that they will die there. So I would love to hear from you guys. Let me know in the comment section down below if you believe in the death penalty. Tell me why or why not down below. I'm gonna end today's video here. As always, I love you guys. Stay safe, stay sober, whatever that looks like to you, because there is no wrong way to recover, and never let anyone tell you otherwise. Bye, you guys. How do I explain that? Oh crap, hold on. Oh no. Frank kept the jury from considering mitigating, oh god, oh my god, oh my god. I can't say that word. I know the word, but I can't say the word. Ugh. From considering, oh my god, from considering mitigating circumstances.